This is going to be a somewhat detailed summary of chapters 1 through 5 of Number the Stars. If you would like a quicker recap of those chapters, you can see my other video of that. So I'm going to be using the table of contents as well as the chapter titles throughout the book to help me review what we read in these first 5 chapters. So first of all, we need to know the setting. This takes place during the Second World War, during the Holocaust. It's in Denmark, and this is a country that has been overtaken by the Germans, and so the people of Denmark are living under German rule. The main family in this book is the Johansons, and that consists of the mother and father, Mr. and Mrs. Johansen, as well as their 2 living daughters, Anne-Marie and Kirsty. And then it also involves the family, the Rosens. The Rosens are a Jewish family. The Johansons are Christian. And so the Rosens are in danger because of the Nazi occupation. So as we start chapter 1 is called Why Are You Running? And so we find 3 girls running home after school. Anne-Marie is along with her friend Ellen, who is Jewish. She's Ellen Rosen, and Anne-Marie's little sister, Kirsty. And as they're running home, they run into some German soldiers, and so they have to talk to them for a little while. Ellen is clearly fearful because she is Jewish. Kirsty, on the other hand, is not fearful at all. She's Christian, but she's also young, so she doesn't really understand that the danger that these soldiers are to her and her family, and especially to Ellen and the Rosens. And as we go through chapter 1, we do start to see some of the things that people are lacking. They no longer have butter. We find out there's no coffee, no cigarettes. Things that they were used to living with in years past are not available anymore. So it's a hard time for everyone, not just the Jewish people. So then chapter 2 is, Who is the man that rides past? And so in this chapter, it starts out with Kirsty begging Anne-Marie to tell her a story. And so Anne-Marie tells Kirsty a fairy tale. And this fairy tale is an opportunity for the girls to escape the harsh reality that they are in. It's a chance to, in their minds, experience something better and more pleasant. They talk about kings and queens, which reminds them of the story that their father, Mr. Johansen, told them about the King of Denmark riding around on his horse every morning, and how the people of Denmark would be willing to stand up and fight for him, and how he was doing his best to take care of his country, even though the Germans had invaded. And so Anne-Marie asks her father why the king didn't fight for Denmark when the Nazis invaded. Instead, he surrendered. And Papa tells her that he was a wise king. He knew that because they were such a small army, they would lose anyway. So he surrendered, but he didn't necessarily cooperate. We find out at some point in these chapters that he actually had the naval ships of Denmark blown up so that the Nazis couldn't take them and use them for their own evil purposes. We also find out in chapter 2 that Anne-Marie's older sister Lise died a few years ago, and as we go on, we find out that she was going to be married to a man named Peter, and that the parents don't really talk about her at all, but she comes in as an important role in this story in her absence. Chapter 3 is Where is Mrs. Hirsch? And at the beginning of this chapter, Mrs. Johansen asks her girls to go to Mrs. Hirsch's shop to find a button so that she can replace a broken button on a piece of clothing. But the girls find that the store is closed and that Mrs. Hirsch is nowhere around. And so they start to question, why isn't she there? Did she go on vacation? What's going on? And the girls find out that Mrs. Hirsch is Jewish and that the Nazis have started closing down stores that are run by Jewish people. So there is more tension, more anxiety, knowing that there are stricter regulations in place and that more people might be in danger. So later on in chapter 3, Peter comes, and so Peter was going to marry Lise, the older sister, but she died. But Peter is still in contact with the Johansons, still somewhat part of the family. So even though he isn't there very much, Anne-Marie loves when he comes. And he comes late at night, and she's worried because there's a curfew. A curfew is when people have to be home. They can't be out and about and on the streets, but he's out past curfew, which is dangerous. And they start to talk about Mrs. Hirsch, who owned the shop that was closed. And Anne-Marie asks if they can't sell their buttons, because that was their shop, how will they earn a living? And Mama said, friends will take care of them, because that's what friends do. And at this point, Anne-Marie doesn't realize the importance of those words and how they will affect her, but they will be important later in the story. So, Anne-Marie's starting to get a little nervous, a little worried, and so at the end of chapter 3, the narrator says this. For a moment she felt frightened, she being Anne-Marie, but she pulled the blanket up higher around her neck and relaxed. It was all imaginary anyway, not real. It was only in the fairy tales that people were called upon to be brave, to die for one another, not in real life Denmark. Oh, there were the soldiers, that was true, and the courageous resistance leaders who sometimes lost their lives, that was true too. But the ordinary people like the Rosens and the Johansons? Anne-Marie admitted to herself, snuggling there in the quiet dark, that she was glad to be an ordinary person who would never be called upon for courage. I want you to remember that quote because it's going to be important later on. This idea of courage and bravery is very important in the story. So now we go on to chapter 4. This is called It Will Be a Long Night. And this chapter starts out with Anne-Marie and Ellen playing paper dolls. Ellen lives close to the Johansons, so she is over at their house quite often. And Mrs. Rosen and Mrs. Johanson often spend time together because they are good friends as well. And so they are playing, and then Kirsty comes, and of course, as little sisters have to do, she has to play with them. They're not thrilled, but they let her play. And then Mama comes in with new shoes for Kirsty. But Kirsty's not excited. They don't have leather anymore in Denmark, so Kirsty's new shoes are made of fish skin, and she hates them. But Ellen offers to take them to her house and have her father use black ink to cover them. And so the girls are playing with the paper dolls for a while, and they talk about how the Jews are celebrating the New Year soon, and they have a different calendar than the Christians do. So the Jewish people are in a time of celebration. Ellen won't be going to school with them for the next month, and so that will be a little bit different. But then that night, things drastically change. Mrs. Rosen comes and knocks on the door that afternoon. She came and knocked on the door, talked to Mama in a hushed voice, and then Mama tells the girls that Ellen's going to spend the night for a few nights. And that's about it. We find out throughout the chapter that the Rosens are fleeing because the Nazis are going to start rounding up the Jews. And they don't want to be taken. So Ellen is with the Johansons. She eats supper with them. She goes to bed. Anne-Marie and Ellen get to have a little sleepover together. And then in the middle of the night, there's a knock on the door. and it's the Nazis. They've come to search their house because they went next door to, or at least to the Rosen's apartment, and did not find them there. So they are looking to see if the Johansons are hiding any of their friends from the Germans. And so the Nazis explore and look around the apartment. They see Anne-Marie and Ellen in their bed, and they make them come out. Just before the Nazis come into the room, Anne-Marie warns Ellen to take off her necklace, the Star of David, because if the Nazis see that, they will know that Ellen is, in fact, Jewish. But Ellen can't get it off, so Anne-Marie grabs the necklace and yanks it off of her in order to save her friend. And so the girls come out, and the Nazis look around, and then they start questioning why the Johansons have 2 blonde-haired girls and 1 dark-haired girl, because the Jewish people tended to have dark hair, and non-Jewish tended to have blonde hair. And fortunately, Mr. Johanson thinks quickly, grabs a baby photo album from the shelf, and pulls out pictures of his 3 daughters when they were babies. And his oldest daughter, when she was a baby, she had black hair. And that saves Ellen, because right now Ellen is pretending to be Lise, the oldest daughter of the Johansons. And so, so the Nazis are there to try to find the Jews, but they don't think they found any, so they leave, and for the time being, Ellen is safe. For the time being, the Johansons are safe, but we don't know what's happened to Mr. and Mrs. Rosen. We don't know if this family will continue to be safe. We don't know if Ellen and her parents will be reunited. So, we will keep reading to find out what happens, and find out if Anne-Marie is right, and that she's just an ordinary person, and she will never be called upon to have courage. So, I hope you enjoy as you continue reading Number the Stars.